While camping deep in Alaska's wilderness, my son coldly abandoned me, leaving me without food or gear. "Bye, go face the grizzly," he said. He thought I'd succumb to hunger or claws so he could claim my inheritance. But when he returned home, I was already there, waiting with a calm smile. "I have a surprise for you," I said. "You won't believe what happened next." But before we dive in, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The front door burst open without warning. Mason stormed in, his hoodie damp from Seattle's drizzle, sneakers squeaking across the hardwood. "Dad, I need $5,000 right now." I froze at my desk, pen still in hand from reviewing invoices. The sharp demand hit me like a slap. This wasn't my son asking for help. It was someone issuing orders. "Mason, what? $5,000? Tonight." Paced the living room, fists clenched. "I already sent your monthly money last week. That $3,000 barely covers my rent. You think that's enough?" He snapped, voice cracking with frustration. "You think it covers everything?" My flannel felt suddenly tight, grease under. My nails from working on Mrs. Chen's transmission earlier. I'd built these auto shops from scratch, labored 8-hour days after Sarah died, sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had. "Son, we've talked about this. You need steady work." "Work?" Mason spun, face red. "Why should I work when you hoard all the money? When you control everything like a dictator?" The accusation stung. I straightened instinctively, military posture kicking in. "Trying to teach you responsibility." "Responsibility," you laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about responsibility? After you die, I'll run your auto shops better than you ever did." The words hung like poison. My chest tightened. The casual talk of my death, the calculation in his eyes, this wasn't grief or frustration. It was greed. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. 20 years of single parenting, of sacrifice, of hoping he'd become the man his mother would be proud of all, collapsed in an instant. Mason saw my shock and shifted, realizing he'd revealed too much. Without another word, he spun toward the door. The slam echoed like a gunshot, rattling the family photo on the mantel, Sarah's smiling face trembling behind the glass. I stood frozen, watching it settle. Silence pressed against my ears. Outside, his car engine roared and faded. I remained at my desk, pen clutched tightly, staring at that trembling photo. The next morning, I reached to straighten it. Sarah's radiant face smiled back, holding 8-year-old Mason at his Little League game. The memory hit like a blow. Sarah's funeral. Mason beside me in an ill-fitting suit, clutching my hand as I tried not to collapse. Our savings drained, mortgage overdue, medical bills piling up. I promised her on her deathbed to give Mason everything she ould. In single quotes, by Thursday I was flipping through old photo albums. Each page chronicled sacrifices I'd long forgotten. $40,000 per year for private school, University of Washington with dorm fees, a brand new $18,000 Honda Civic. For graduation, even at 16, his eyes seemed empty. While other teens worked summer jobs, Mason gamed. Living off allowances I rationalized as investment in his future. The pattern was clear. Every bailout, every handout, every crisis solved with money had chipped away at his character. I'd tried to be a good father, but I'd created a stranger who calculated my death like a business transaction. Saturday evening, I sat in Sarah's chair, the one I'd never moved. She would have seen this coming, always knowing people better than I did. She would have pushed Mason toward independence, made him earn his way. I whispered to the empty room. I failed her. The realization sank like winter cold. Years spent buying his love, patching my guilt with payments, providing for him had become a substitute for parenting him. Sunday morning, I returned the albums to the shelf and sat at my desk. My hands shook as I reached for pen and paper. Military discipline steadied my breathing. I had to plan for outcomes I never wanted to consider. The phone rang. Mason's name flashed. I hesitated, then answered. Double quotes. "Hello, son. Dad, hey, how are you?" His voice was artificially bright like a sales pitch. "I'm fine. This is..." Unexpected after last week? Yeah, about that. I was out of line. Want to make it right. Actually, I have a proposal, something that could fix everything. I waited. Silence reinforced by training. Let's go camping in Alaska, Denali National Park. Just us. Like when I was a kid. Whiplash hit me. Mason hadn't shown interest in the outdoors since high school. It's sudden, I said. I know. My friends canceled last minute. Tickets are already paid flights. Gear, park permits. They expire tomorrow. My grip tightened. The urgency smelled manufactured. Mason, when have you ever planned trips? Come on, Dad. Remember when? You taught me to read tracks, start fires with wet wood. The wilderness shows a man's true character. Those memories twisted in my chest before Sarah's death. Before money became my solution, this could reconnect us. Mason continued, voice softening. No distractions, no city stress, just father and son in the wild. I closed my eyes. Rationally, every warning screamed. Sudden enthusiasm, canceled friends, urgent tickets, it all felt staged. But beneath the suspicion, hope flickered. Flights. Leave March 25th, he pressed. Seattle to Anchorage, and we drive to the park. 5 days, just like old times. 5 days, I repeated slowly. Dad, please. This might be our last chance. The silence stretched. I stared at the legal papers on my desk, potential safeguards against worst-case scenarios. Finally, I said, let's do it. Really? Fantastic. I'll text the flight details. Meet me at SeaTac. You'll see it'll be amazing. The line went dead. I set the phone down, trembling slightly. Outside, Seattle drizzle painted the window. Hope and preparation felt equally like betrayals. 3 days later, I folded the legal papers and slipped them into my travel bag. Mason waited at gate C12, bouncing on his heels like an eager teenager. Backpack pristine, tag still on. His grin stretched too wide when he spotted me approaching. Dad, perfect timing. They just called for boarding. You seem excited? I studied his face, noticing the subtle twitch in his left eye. Military training had taught me to read nervous energy, to separate genuine enthusiasm from performance. Why wouldn't he be eager for a father-son adventure in the last frontier? He hoisted his pack with obvious effort. When's the last time we did something like this? On the first flight, he chattered nonstop about wilderness photography, breathing in the fresh air, though he consulted his phone more than seemed necessary for someone trying to disconnect. I shared stories from my Navy's survival training, how to read weather patterns, identify edible plants, navigate without GPS. Really know all this? Mason asked, scribbling notes on a napkin. 20 years in the service teaches you to be ready for anything. A flicker passed across his expression calculation, disguised as admiration. Our layover in Seattle dragged. Mason excused himself 3 times, claiming bathroom breaks that lasted 20 minutes each. Through the terminal windows, planes taxied. Under a gray sky, Alaska inching closer. The final flight carried us over jagged mountain ranges, like peaks against the horizon. Mason pressed his face to the window, reflection tense rather than awed. Anchorage greeted us with crisp air and the scent of snow. At the rental counter, I handled paperwork for a Toyota 4Runner, extra insurance, chains for mountain roads, while Mason loaded gear, favoring his right shoulder as if it ached. Outdoor supply store next, he said, checking his phone again. Need a few extras? At Northern Exposure Outfitters, he insisted on high-powered flashlights. Emergency flares, rope more than needed for basic camping. The clerk, a weathered man with frostbitten scars, raised an eyebrow. Just want to be prepared, Mason. Replied quickly. Highway 3 stretched ahead like a gray ribbon through endless forest. Mountains rising on both sides, snow-capped peaks catching the last light. Beautiful country, I said, trying to fill the silence. Yeah, really isolated, Mason said, satisfaction in his tone. Miles from anywhere, we stopped for gas as darkness fell. While I filled the tank, Mason wandered toward the convenience store. Through the fluorescent windows, I watched him pull out his phone, shoulders hunched. Voice low and urgent. Returning to the car, I asked casually, "Everything all right?" "Just checking weather for tomorrow," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Storm system moving in, but should clear by morning." The lie was effortless. I had checked the forecast clear skies for 3 days. A familiar military unease settled in my gut, the same instinct that had kept me alive in hostile territory. Something was wrong, though I couldn't place it. Miles later, the gas station exchange still gnawed at me. "So what did the weather service actually say? Possible snow flurries?" Mason muttered. "Nothing major." His deflection confirmed my suspicion, but I kept calm. Good thing. We packed extra layers. Denali's entrance appeared around a bend. Wooden signs marking the park, cabins scattered among towering sprues. The visitor center buzzed with early activity despite March's off-season. Most visitors came in summer. March travelers were serious outdoorsmen or locals. Dnali Lodge Motel looked exactly like the brochure rustic logs. Rooms named Grizzly Den and Caribou Creek. The young desk clerk with calloused hands processed our registration while GT/Mason studied trail maps. "First, time to Denali," she asked. "For him." I nodded. "I've been to Alaska before military exercises. Which trails are you considering?" Mason stepped forward. "Tlanica River backcountry route." "We want the full wilderness experience." The clerk's expression tightened. "That's advanced terrain, very remote. Most people start with shorter nature trails." "We're experienced campers," Mason insisted, though experience clearly meant nothing in the past decade. Park Ranger Jennifer Walsh appeared next. Confident and capable, the kind of presence that demanded attention. Her briefing room smelled of coffee and pine, walls covered in topographical maps and wildlife photos. "Gentlemen, let's be clear about what you're undertaking." She spread a detailed map across the table. "Tlanica River route takes you 30 miles from the nearest ranger station. No cell coverage, no other campers this time of year." She pointed to red markers on the map. "Recent grizzly activity here. Here. And here. 2 cubs spotted last week, protective mother nearby. Wolves seen, moose unpredictable during spring. Mating season." Mason leaned forward, studying the isolated sections intently. "Emergency evacuation?" "Helicopter rescue, weather permitting, could take days if conditions worsen." Walsh's stern look suggested she had seen too many overconfident tourists become statistics. "Your combined wilderness experience?" she asked. I answered honestly about my military background. Mason mumbled vague references to camping with friends. "Sir, with respect, this route isn't for beginners. We offer guided tours and shorter trails." "We'll be fine," Mason interrupted. "My father's practically a survival expert. After signing liability waivers and watching bear safety videos, we rented bear-resistant food containers and emergency beacons. I insisted on a defensive rifle, a Remington 870 that felt familiar in my hands." "You sure about that?" Mason asked nervously. "Alaska rule number 1? Never go unarmed in bear country at our last stop." Ranger Walsh demonstrated the emergency beacon. "Push, hold 5 seconds, and search and rescue receives your location." But even with coordinates, rescue could take 12 to 18 hours minimum. Loading packs into the truck, pre-mission tension surged. Every detail warned me: remote location, Mason's inexperience, his insistence on maximum isolation. "Still sure about this route?" I asked. Mason's smile seemed forced. "Absolutely. No turning back now, right, Dad?" The words sounded less like encouragement, more like finality. Through the rearview mirror, the ranger station faded behind the forest. Civilization slipping away, the wilderness suddenly felt less like adventure and more like a trap. The forest road narrowed, branches scraping windows like skeletal fingers. My GPS tracked our progress, taking us deeper into unmarked territory beyond the last cell tower, past the final trail marker, into wilderness that had swallowed unprepared travelers before. "We're officially off the grid now," I murmured, watching the signal bars vanish from my phone. Mason's laugh sounded hollow. "Perfect. Just us and nature." At mile 23, Talonica marked the end of the drivable road. I parked beside weathered wooden posts that resembled grave markers in the dim afternoon light. Unloading our packs highlighted the difference in preparation. Mine balanced perfectly, a product of decades of military training. Mason's bulged awkwardly, gear he'd never tested. Jesus, this thing weighs a ton, he complained, struggling with the shoulder straps. Proper packing takes practice. I adjusted his weight distribution and noticed him wince at his right shoulder. You hurt yourself? Old injury, nothing serious. The trail wound through dense spruce where the afternoon sun barely penetrated. Moss-covered logs created obstacles, and small streams demanded careful stepping-stone navigation. Wildlife signs appeared immediately. Massive moose tracks pressed into muddy patches. Eagle cries echoed from the canopy, and distant howls warned of wolves. You hear? That... Mason stopped, face pale. The wolf pack's probably 5 miles away. I kept walking, noticing that his nervousness had nothing to do with wildlife appreciation. For someone who insisted on this remote route, he seemed genuinely frightened. 3 hours of hiking brought us to a clearing by a Russian Krika, perfect campsite with flat ground. Fresh water and clear sightlines. Military habits kicked in as I scoped defensive positions and escape routes. Mason collapsed on a fallen log. How much farther do we go? He asked, breath ragged. This is good for tonight. We'll push deeper tomorrow. Setting up camp revealed more of Mason's inexperience. While I methodically established our perimeter, hung the food cache 12 feet high, positioned the cooking area downwind, and kept emergency supplies accessible, he struggled with basic tent assembly. Dad, can you help with this? He held tangled guidelines like surrender flags. Teaching him proper technique felt like old times, back when he wanted to learn instead of just inherit. But something nagged at me. Why insist on wilderness camping if you couldn't handle basic equipment? Evening brought a campfire, casting dancing shadows across our clearing. I prepared a simple meal while Mason sat unusually quiet, staring into the flames with a guarded expression. March nights in Alaska demanded respect. The temperature dropped steadily. Remember when we used to do this? I tried to start conversation. You were maybe 10, roasting marshmallows until they caught fire. Mom was still alive then. His voice carried unexpected sadness. She loved our camping trips, said they brought out the best in people. Mason nodded, eyes distant. Tell me about your childhood, Dad. Before the military, before the business. What was it like being poor? The question surprised me. Mason rarely showed interest in my background. I shared stories I hadn't told in years, growing up in rural Montana, working farms during summer, earning every dollar through sweat and determination. Sounds hard, he said, but his tone hinted at calculation rather than sympathy. Hard work builds character. It teaches you the value of earning what you have. A flicker crossed his features. Perhaps resentment or frustration, but his voice remained neutral. Lucky for me, right? Skipping all that character building. The conversation continued around the fire, Mason prompting stories about my military service, survival training, and skills that had kept me alive in hostile environments. How do you know when someone's lying? He asked suddenly. Body language, voice patterns, inconsistencies in their story. I poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling into darkness. Why? Just curious. You've always been good at reading people. Later, I banked the fire for the night. Peaceful silence settled over the campsite. Stars emerged in patterns I hadn't seen since my last deployment, unmarred by city lights. The wilderness felt pristine, untouched, almost sacred. Asterisk, I'll take first watch, Mason volunteered. Not tired yet? We've got a long day tomorrow? To enjoy this, listen to the forest sounds. I crawled into my tent, trusting him to wake me for the second shift. Through the nylon walls, I heard him moving around the fire, adding logs, settling into watch position. Normal camping sounds that should have been comforting. Yet as sleep approached, his offer bothered me. Mason had never shown interest in solitary reflection or nature appreciation. Why start now? The last thing I noticed before exhaustion took over was the change in sounds outside. No casual movement, only careful stillness, as though someone was waiting rather than observing. Dawn light filtering through the tent walls roused me. Outside, metallic clanging signaled equipment being packed too early, too urgent for normal preparations. I unzipped the flap and stepped into frigid air, breath visible in white puffs. Mason stood by our truck, methodically loading gear with a military precision I'd never seen before. Every piece of survival equipment, GPS device, emergency beacon, rifle, and food container disappeared into the vehicle. "What's going on?" I called. Mason startled, then straightened defiantly, getting ready to leave. "We planned 3 more days." "What's the rush?" "Change of plans." He avoided my eyes, continuing to pack. "Weather's turning bad." Fly hung in the air. Yesterday's forecast had been clear, and the sky showed no threat. My military instincts, dormant since Alaska, screamed warnings. "Mason, talk to me. What's really happening?" Something snapped. Years of carefully controlled resentment erupted across his face. "You want to know what's happening? I'm done. Done with your control, your manipulation, your constant judgment. Son, I don't understand." "Don't." He wheeled around, fists clenched. "Don't call me son. Sons don't get treated like employees. Sons don't have to beg for every dollar while their father sits on millions." The venom in his voice hit me like physical blows. This wasn't a momentary outburst. This was cultivated hatred, festering beneath our family's surface for years. "I've given you everything. You've given me nothing." Mason's voice cracked with rage. "You made me dependent, kept me weak, controlled every part of my life with your checkbook. Well, guess what? I'm taking control now." My hands trembled as understanding hit. Camping trip, this whole thing had been planned. Finally catching on, military genius? He laughed, void of warmth. "Took you long enough." "Why?" "Mason, if you needed money, we could have worked something out." "I don't want your allowance anymore, Dad. I want what's mine by right your business. Everything you've dangled over my head for decades." The cold morning air seemed to freeze around us. I stared at this stranger wearing my son's face, speaking words that shattered 20 years of paternal love. "You're planning to leave me here?" "Very good. Yes, I'm leaving you here. To figure things out for yourself? Maybe 30 miles of wilderness will teach you what real dependence feels like." My chest constricted. "Mason, this is bear country. Without equipment, without GPS, you should have thought about that before you made me your puppet." He slammed the truck's tailgate. "Maybe you'll survive. Maybe you won't. Either way, I'll inherit what should have been mine." "Years ago, please." The words scraped my throat raw. "Whatever I did wrong, we can fix it. Don't do this." For a moment, doubt flickered across his face. A memory of affection, maybe. Then it hardened into something unrecognizable. "Goodbye, Dad." He climbed into the driver's seat. "Try not to meet the Grizzlies too quickly. I want you to have time to think about what you created." The engine roared. Stepped toward the truck, desperate to reason, but he threw it in reverse and backed. Away, through the windshield. His face was cold, calculated, devoid of any filial emotion. "Mason?" My shout echoed off distant mountains as the truck disappeared around a bend. The engine sound faded, leaving me on an empty dirt road in the vast Alaskan wilderness, 30 miles from the nearest human. Dust settled at my feet. Silence enveloped me. No voices, no machines, only wind through spruce and the distant cry of a hawk. I stood still, processing the enormity. My son, the boy I'd raised, protected, provided for, had sentenced me to death. Dust hung from Mason's truck as military. Training kicked in, overriding emotional devastation. Shock was a luxury I couldn't afford, not 30 miles from civilization in Grizzly country. I forced steady breaths, letting decades of Navy discipline guide me. First rule of survival: assess resources. I patted my pocket's wallet, house, keys, a small folding knife. No food, no water, no GPS, no emergency beacon, just the clothing on my back. Second rule, evaluate the environment. March in Alaska meant nights below freezing. Dense spruce forests, unmarked trails, total isolation. Ranger Walsh's warnings echoed recent grizzly activity wolf packs. Unpredictable weather. Third rule, prioritize survival shelter, water, signaling, navigation. I studied the sun's position. East led deeper into the wilderness. West eventually. Reached the main park road, distance uncertain. Fragments of topographical knowledge from the ranger briefing returned. Rivers flowing northwest, toward the park boundary. Movement was critical. Standing still meant death. I began walking west, following Mason's faint tire tracks. Within 100 yards, they diverged from a narrow animal trail through underbrush. Game trails usually led to water sources essential. For survival and potential rescue visibility, every step required focus. At 58, my knees protested, and my civilian conditioning fell far short of military peak. But anger fueled me fury at Mason's betrayal, at my blindness, at the years spent enabling his transformation into this monster. The forest closed in like a living tunnel. Massive spruce blocked sunlight, creating twilight even at midday. I broke branches along the way, leaving crude trail markers for potential rescuers. Though the odds of anyone finding me felt impossibly slim, bear signs were everywhere. Claw. Marks on bark, massive paw prints in soft soil, scat disturbingly fresh. I made noise as I walked, remembering Ranger Walsh's instructions about avoiding surprise encounters. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had put me in a situation where bears might be the least of my problems. Hours passed. My mouth grew dry, then parched. The game trail twisted through denser vegetation, and several times I lost it completely. Forced to backtrack and search for the continuation. Exhaustion crept into my legs, but stopping meant losing precious daylight. A distant sound made me freeze. Mechanical, rhythmic, definitely human-made. Multiple engines. I stood perfectly still, listening. The sound came from the north, maybe. Half a mile away, TVs or motorcycles hunters, park rangers, search and rescue. Hope surged for the first time since Mason's betrayal. I changed direction, moving toward the sounds, pushing through undergrowth that tore at my clothing. The engines grew louder, definitely ATVs moving slowly and methodically. The forest began to thin, and through the trees I glimpsed a clearing ahead. The engines were maybe 200 yards away. I moved faster, abandoning stealth for speed branches, whipping across my face as I pressed toward potential salvation. Breaking through the tree line, I stumbled into a clearing where 4 ATV riders had stopped for a lunch break. They looked up in shock as I emerged from the forest, disheveled, scratched, clearly out of place in this remote wilderness. The lead rider, a bearded man in his 40s with the weathered look of someone who lived outdoors, shut off his engine and approached with professional concern. "Sir? What happened? Why are you out here alone, my son?" "He left me here, took all our equipment, and drove away." My voice came out hoarse from dehydration and stress. The man's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "Someone abandoned you here? That's attempted murder. I'm William Harper. My son Mason brought me on a camping trip. Then, he took our truck and all our survival gear, said he was leaving me to die." The bearded man removed his helmet, revealing sharp, assessing eyes. "I'm Oliver Reed, former park ranger here. These are my friends. We're doing a backcountry tour." The other riders gathered around, horror etched on their faces. One, a woman in her 30s, handed me a water bottle, which I drained gratefully. "How long ago did this happen?" Oliver asked, his tone professional and urgent. "This morning, maybe 4 hours ago." Oliver exchanged glances with his companions. "We need to get you out immediately. Radio range is limited, but we can reach the ranger station from higher elevation. There's something else." He studied his GPS device. "If your son took the main road, it's a 6-hour drive minimum to Anchorage. But I know a old ranger trail through the backcountry. We can have you back to the park entrance in 90 minutes. The implication hit me like electricity. You mean I could get back before him? The question is, do you want law enforcement involved immediately, or do you have other plans? A hard resolve crystallized in my chest. Mason had calculated. My death planned my abandonment, counted on my helplessness. He had made one critical error, underestimating the solidarity of the wilderness, community, and my survival instincts. I want to get back to the motel first, said carefully, before I decide anything about the police. Oliver nodded. Understanding? Climb on behind me. We'll take the ranger trail. Your son will never see us coming. The ATV ride through hidden forest paths revealed a side of Denali. I'd never known a network of service trails maintained for emergency access. Known only to rangers and serious backcountry guides, Oliver navigated with the confidence of someone who had traveled these routes for years. 15 years as a ranger here, seen a lot of stupid decisions, but deliberate abandonment that's criminal. The terrain blurred past, creek crossings, steep inclines, sections where we had to dismount and guide the ATVs around fallen trees. Despite the rough conditions, we made excellent time, emerging onto paved road well ahead of Oliver's estimate. Denali Lodge Motel appeared in the distance, its log cabin architecture incredibly welcoming after my morning in the wilderness. As we approached the parking area, I scanned for our rental truck still not returned. Looks like your son's still driving back, Oliver observed. You've got time to prepare whatever reception you're planning. The other riders offered contact information, promising to serve as witnesses if legal proceedings became necessary. Oliver handed me his card with personal cell and email. Call me when you're ready to talk to authorities. Ain't what your son did. There need to be consequences. As they prepared to leave, Oliver paused. Sir, may I ask what you plan to do? When he gets back? I looked toward the motel room where our belongings waited, then at the legal documents still folded in my jacket pocket. Mason had spent years planning my destruction. Now it was my turn. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants, I said quietly. Just not the way he expects. Back in our motel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. Oliver's card lay beside me, along with his offer to contact authorities immediately. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The legal documents I'd prepared in Seattle felt prophetic now, folded in my jacket pocket like a loaded weapon. 3 weeks ago, I'd changed my will in a moment of paternal disappointment. Now that decision looked like divine preparation for war. I spread the papers across the small desk. Reviewing the language I'd crafted with my attorney, Mason would inherit nothing. Everything would go to wildlife conservation charities, veterans organizations, and a scholarship fund in Sarah's name. The irony was perfect. My son's attempt to murder me for inheritance would leave him with exactly nothing, but legal documents alone weren't enough. I needed evidence, witnesses, consequences that would follow Mason for the rest of his life. I dialed Oliver's number. He answered on the first ring. William, you settled in? Right, I need your help with something specific. When Mason returns, I want everything documented, his reaction, his words, every detail. You planning to confront him before calling the police? I'm planning to give him exactly what he thought he wanted, the chance to inherit my business right, up until the moment he realizes what he's actually done to himself. Silence stretched across the line. Finally, Oliver spoke. That's strategic. You want me there as a witness, if you're willing. And maybe bring that digital camera you had on the trail. Mason's going to say things that should be preserved for a jury. What time are you expecting him? I calculated Mason's route, Main Park Road to Anchorage Highway. Probable stops for gas and food, his tendency to drive cautiously on unfamiliar roads. Between 9 and 10 tonight, he'd be tired, overconfident, expecting an empty room and a grieving father who never made it back. Instead, he'd find his intended victim very much alive and very well prepared. After Oliver agreed to arrive by 8:30, I called my attorney in Seattle. The conversation was brief but crucial. Tomorrow morning, the new will would be officially filed. Mason's inheritance would vanish the moment the legal documents hit the courthouse. Next, contacted the motel office and arranged an adjacent room for Oliver. The desk clerk, an elderly woman familiar with decades of Alaskan drama, asked no questions about the unusual request. Evening arrived with surreal calm. I showered off the wilderness grime, changed into clean clothes, and arranged the room methodically. The legal documents were spread across the desk where Mason would see them immediately. Oliver's camera had clear sight lines from the adjoining room. My phone was programmed with 911 on speed dial. Military training had taught me that preparation eliminated variables. Tonight, Mason would walk into a controlled environment where every advantage belonged to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had spent months planning my death in the wilderness. Now I was planning his social and financial death in civilization. The difference? My plan would leave him alive to face consequences. At 8:15, Oliver knocked softly. He entered carrying professional photography equipment and the grim expression of someone who'd seen too many wilderness tragedies. Recording equipment was set up in the adjacent room, audio and video coverage of the entire space. He gestured toward the connecting door. When he arrives, you'll have everything documented. What happens legally when we turn this over to authorities? Attempted murder in the first degree? Alaska takes wilderness abandonment seriously. Essentially a death sentence with extra steps. With your testimony, my witness statement, and whatever he says tonight, he's looking at serious prison time. I nodded, feeling cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Then we waited. Outside, darkness gathered around the motel like a closing fist. Through the window, I could see the main road, where Mason's headlights would soon appear, carrying him toward a reckoning he'd never imagined possible. The phone showed 8:47 p.m. any minute now. My son would discover that his perfect crime had become his perfect downfall. Headlights swept across the parking lot, and I recognized the distinctive sound of our rental truck engine. Mason had returned from his failed murder attempt, probably rehearsing grief-stricken calls to report his father's disappearance. I positioned myself in the chair facing the door, legal documents clearly visible on the desk. Through the connecting wall, I heard Oliver adjusting his recording equipment. Everything was ready. Mason's key scraped the lock twice before catching. When the door opened, he stepped inside with the cautious air of someone expecting to find an empty room. The overhead light illuminated his face, and I watched recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Dad?" The word came strangled, disbelieving. "Hello, son. How was your drive?" His face cycled through confusion, shock, and something approaching terror. How? How are you here? How did you get back? Turns out I'm harder to kill than you calculated. Mason's legs seemed to buckle slightly. He gripped the door frame, eyes darting around the room, as if searching for escape routes. "I don't understand. I left you 30 miles from nowhere without food, water, or equipment." "Yes, I remember." My voice stayed conversational, almost friendly. Interesting choice of last words, by the way. "Go meet the Grizzlies." Really captured the sentiment beautifully. "Dad, wait, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly. You brought me to Alaska to murder me for my inheritance. Spent months planning it, researched the most remote location possible. Even practiced your shock son routine for when the authorities found my body." Mason's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "The problem with your plan," continued, standing slowly, "is that you underestimated the wilderness community."
Turns out there are people who actually help each other survive?
Instead of abandoning family members to die? Look, if this is about money, it was always about money for you. That's what I finally understand. Every conversation, every camping trip, every moment of what I thought was father-son bond in you, were just calculating my net worth. I walked to the desk and picked up the legal documents. You want to know what's fascinating? 3 weeks ago, right after our fight, I changed my will. Called it paternal disappointment at the time. Mason's eyes locked onto the papers in my hands. "What do you mean changed?" "I mean you inherit nothing. Not the auto shops. Not the bank accounts. Not the house your mother loved. Goes to charity, wildlife conservation, veterans organizations, scholarship funds." The color drained from his face completely. "You can't do that. I'm your son. You are my son. This morning, you became something else entirely. A man who calculated his father's death for financial gain. Dad, please, if you'll just listen. I listened this morning while you explained how my controlling behavior ruined your life. I listened when you said I deserved to die alone in bear country. I'm done listening. Mason's composure cracked completely. You self-righteous bastard. You created this your constant control, manipulation, keeping me dependent while judging every choice I made. There it is. It's the real Mason Harper. You want to destroy me? Fine, but remember you made me into this. Every dollar you dangled, every condition you attached, every way you controlled my life, this is your creation. I felt a strange calm settle over me. You're absolutely right. I did create this. I enabled your dependence, bought your affection, confused providing with parenting. That's my failure as a father. Then change the will back. Fix this. The will was filed this afternoon. It's done. Walked toward the door, past my son, who looked smaller, somehow diminished. But you're wrong about one thing. Didn't create your willingness to commit murder. That choice was entirely yours. Mason's voice cracked. Where are you going? To call the police? Attempted murder is still a felony, even when it fails? Dad, wait. I paused at the threshold. Goodbye, Mason. In a strange way, you've given me exactly what I needed. Absolute clarity about who you really are. The last thing I saw before stepping outside was my son collapsing into the chair I'd vacated. Staring at the legal documents, representing the complete destruction of everything he'd tried to gain through my death. The fluorescent lights in the Anchorage Police Department interview room buzzed overhead as Detective Sarah Martinez reviewed the evidence spread across the metal table. Oliver's digital recordings, my sworn statement, and Mason's recorded confession from the motel room created an overwhelming case. Mr. Harper, I've been investigating wilderness crimes for 8 years. This is the most premeditated case of attempted murder I've encountered. Detective Martinez clicked through the audio recordings on her laptop. Your son's statements are remarkably incriminating. He always was thorough when he wanted something. The district attorney will file charges this morning, attempted murder in the first degree, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit fraud regarding your inheritance. Alaska doesn't treat wilderness abandonment lightly. Through the interview room window, I could see Mason in handcuffs being processed at the booking desk. Overnight in jail had stripped away his last pretenses. No more manipulation. It's no more charm. Just a 20-year-old man facing the consequences of calculated evil. Oliver sat beside me, having driven down from Denali to provide his witness testimony. What's the likely sentence for this kind of crime? 15 to 25 years, depending on plea negotiations. Alaska views deliberate wilderness abandonment as equivalent to attempted murder, because that's exactly what it is. I watched my son through the glass, feeling an unexpected absence of satisfaction. This wasn't victory. It was simply the natural endpoint of choices he'd made over years of increasing entitlement and resentment. Will you be returning to Seattle today? Detective Martinez asked. Tomorrow? I need to visit my attorney here first. Finalize some estate planning documents. The detective nodded knowingly, making sure your new will is completely secure, among other things. I stood, gathering my jacket and the evidence folders. I'm establishing a foundation in my late wife's name. Seems appropriate that Mason's inheritance should help people who actually deserve assistance. Oliver and I walked out of the police station into crisp Anchorage morning air. Downtown traffic moved with typical Alaska pace and hurried. Practical, purposeful. What happens now? Oliver asked. Back to my business in Seattle. Back to figuring out what kind of man I want to be in whatever years I have left. I looked up at the Chugach Mountains rising beyond the city skyline. Surviving your own child's murder attempt gives remarkable clarity about priorities. You planning to visit him during the trial? The question caught me off guard. I considered it seriously, the paternal instinct to maintain connection warring against the reality of what Mason had attempted. No, the man I raised died somewhere in those woods yesterday morning. What's left isn't my son anymore. We reached Oliver's truck in the parking lot. He handed me a business card with his personal information. If you ever want to come back to Alaska for the right reasons, camping, fishing, actually enjoying the wilderness, call me.
Ow.
House, Why would you do that? Because you survived something that should have killed you. And instead of letting it make you bitter, you're using it to help other people. That's worth supporting. I shook his hand, feeling genuine gratitude for this stranger who had become an unlikely ally. Thank you for everything. Thank the wilderness community. We look out for each other up here. As Oliver drove away, I pulled out my phone and dialed my attorney in Seattle. There were foundations to establish, scholarships to fund, a lifetime of enabling to undo through positive action. Mason had brought me to Alaska to die for money. Instead, I'd learned to live with purpose. In trying to destroy me, he had inadvertently taught me the difference between providing for someone and truly caring about them. The irony was perfect and perfectly just. 3 days later, back in Seattle, I received a letter from Mason in jail. 5 pages of manipulation disguised as apology. It's promising change if I reconsidered the inheritance, explaining how prison would ruin his life. I read it once, then fed it through my office. Shredder. Some relationships don't survive attempted murder, no matter how much money you've invested in them. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the AE channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box to the left.